Hello everybody, I'm George from Ireland. So welcome to St Mary Magdalene Church in Richmond-upon-Thames, United Kingdom. And I'm here mainly because this is where James Thomson is laid to rest. Right above my head, you'll see there that brass plaque. Unfortunately, it was illegible to you. Even with my good eyes looking up to it, I could scarcely read it. James Thomson, and he said he's buried beneath there, but they've moved it a lot. He might have been on the left-hand side. I'll show you later where I think it was previously. Buried somewhere under the floor. Unfortunately, they don't have a recording of exactly where. So James Thomson is best known having written the words to rule Britannia. So he's Thomson without a P, and North Britons usually spell it without a P. So he's born near Jedburgh in Scotland in 1700. He was born before the Act of Union. He was brought up in a Church of Scotland family. He was a child of precocious intellectual gifts, and he attended a local grammar school. He later went to Edinburgh University. It was thought that they'd make him a minister in the Church of Scotland, and of course almost all academics were clergy in those days, but in the end he didn't go for that. I don't know if you say ordination in the Church of Scotland, because it's not an Episcopal church. They've got no bishops, whereas the Episcopalian Church in Scotland, which is a carbon copy of the Church of England, i.e. it has bishops and archbishops. But back to Thomson's time. So his family were firm supporters of the Hanoverian dynasty. I don't know what their take on the Act of Union was, and he was a teenager when the Jacobites came back to the British Isles to try and reclaim their throne. His family did not throw their lot with him, and that was good news for them. People his age were fighting in 1715, there was 1719. But anyway, by this time he graduated from the University of Edinburgh. People grew up fast in those days because they died fast. His life expectancy was so low, and there was just less to learn. We knew far less in sciences. Obviously be learning Latin and Greek mostly, and then foreign language might do French or Italian. That'd be it. I mean, who was learning Chinese back then? Anyway, so he decided to come to South Britain, and he made his name in literary circles. He knew everyone who was anyone in literary London, including Dr. Samuel Johnson, who was considerably his junior, and despite Dr. Johnson being notoriously Caledonophobic, he got along well with Thomson. They didn't know each other terribly well, but it was quite a small world. I mean, the population of London was about 1 million at that time, still making it, well, the largest city in Europe, one of the largest cities in the world, though Delhi would have been larger at the time, twice as large. Anyway, so he had a collaboration with a musician called Mallet, who also wrote some of the words, and Mallet wrote a masque, which is a type of play. It was performed at Clifton, which is not too far from here, maybe 15 miles to the west, on these bluffs overlooking the River Thames. And that house, Clifton, that famous stately home, it was owned by Frederick, Prince of Wales, who was the father of George III. And so for that play, Alfred, was about King Alfred, that 9th century king of Wessex, who also called him Rex Totius Britanniae. And it was for that forgotten play that he wrote the words to rule Britannia, and it was a sort of an anti-Jacobite song. It was shortly before the 1745 Jacobite rebellion, and so Britain was not quite at its imperial zenith. France was a la grande nation. At that time, British naval power was probably, well, it was not quite at its peak, but was definitely the strongest in the world. Could have yet been eclipsed by France. As we know, that didn't happen in the end. So this was to the joy of navalists, the words he penned. And it's often misunderstood because this poem is about, it's meant to be an imperative. It's a mandate from heaven. It's not, so Britannia rule the waves. It's not rules. It's not a statement, it's an order. So God is ordering them to rule the waves, which is very presumptuous to say the least. I don't know if he actually ever worshipped this church. I suppose he did, because that's why he's been buried here. Because although he's Church of Scotland, he might well have worshipped the Church of England when he came down here. I don't know if there are Presbyterian churches for him to worship in, because that would have been closer to his own religious background. So yeah, that was the world premiere of Alfred there at Clifton House, which has passed into private hands and was owned by the Astor family and so on. I've been there, I filmed there some months ago. So James Thomson, he's a renowned poet. He deserves to be better known for his poems, particularly ones, The Seasons. He used to like wandering in Richmond Park, and then that wasn't open to the public back then, but because of his establishing connections, he could get in. Members of the royal family were living there into the early 20th century. So then he caught cold swimming, actually, in August 1748, and he died 27th of August 1748, and lies here. So people hardly know anything about any of his other works, and that's an absolute staple of Last Night of the Proms, Rule Britannia. So I could tell you some of the words of it. So, when Britain first at heaven's command arose from out the azure main, arose, arose, arose. This was the charter of the land, and guardian angels sang this strain. Rule Britannia, Britannia rule the waves. Britons never, never, never shall be slaves. Still, the haughty tyrants ne'er shall tame. Still more dreadful shout that rise from each foreign stroke as the loud blast that tears the skies serves but to root thy native oak. What are the other ones about trying to bend thee down? The haughty tyrants ne'er shall tame. All their attempts to bend thee down shall but work their woe and thy renown. Nations not so blessed as thee must in their turns to tyrants fall, but thou shalt flourish, great and free, the dread and envy of them all. Thy cities shall with commerce shine. All thine shall be the subject main, and every short and circles thine. Blessed isle with matchless beauty crowned, and manly hearts to guard the fair. So I've got it in the wrong sequence a little bit, but the message of it is that the creation of the universe, when this island of Great Britain arose from under the sea, angels were flying around singing "Rule Britannia, Britannia rule the waves." Obviously, there's nothing biblical about that. He just made it up. So it's highly self-flattering, but hyper-nationalistic songs tend to be. So it's perceived as nauseatingly jingoistic and chauvinistic by many people these days. Saying that Great Britain is a free country. Notice he never mentions England, Scotland, or Wales. Ireland, we weren't part of the UK at that time. And other countries are ruled by tyrants. Tyrants shall attack Great Britain, but they shall always be foiled. Every time they try to defeat Great Britain, they will lose. It will make people even more jealous of Great Britain and even more frightened of Great Britain, and so on. So it's very optimistic. So that's what James Thomson is really known about. He's Thomson without a P. So in Caledonia, they usually don't write a P there. Anyway, so this is it. Christian worship goes back here 800 years. You can see it's been built and rebuilt in several phases. And the other door of it actually dates to about 1904, but it's very realistic. You'd think it's flint from the same time as the older part was built. Anyway, that's enough from me from St Mary Magdalene Church here in Richmond. Toodaloo.